Hi, my name's Kim Donnelly, and today we're going to discuss infographics. Infographics is a tool commonly used by businesses in the education industry. Businesses utilize infographics to help compare their products and services to their competitors' products and services. In the education industry, infographics are commonly used to help simplify complex content or information to assist the learners. Today, we have 3 goals for you. We want you to learn 3 benefits in creating infographics, understand 3 concepts of creating graphics, and have a basic understanding of the design principles that should be utilized when you are designing and creating your infographic. According to Oxford dictionaries, an infographic is a visual image, such as a chart or diagram, used to represent information or data. Here is an example of an infographic. It is displaying the top 5 largest coffee chains in the U.S. You will see that it highlights Starbucks as the number 1 largest coffee chain in the United States with 8,000 locations. This infographic is comparing it with 4 other chains and showing the number of locations each have. Let's now discuss 3 benefits to creating an infographic. First, an infographic supports the cognitive processing of complex information. This is a major benefit of utilizing an infographic. This helps simplify information to help the audience process the content. Second, an infographic creates an appealing design to capture your audience attention. By combining the use of pictures, graphs, and illustrations, you can create appealing designs. And number 3, infographics provide informative and shareable information. Now that we've discussed the benefits of an infographic, let's move on and discuss 3 concepts of an infographic. The first concept I have listed: enhance understanding of a complex concept. I believe this is one of the key concepts for infographics. Infographics enhance the understanding of the complex information by reducing cognitive overload because the audience finds them engaging. The second concept, infographics present information in a graphical layout. Presenting this complex information in a graphical layout can be less intimidating for the learner and motivate the learner to learn. The third concept, infographics provide a visual form of storytelling in a visual appealing format. Now that we've reviewed 3 benefits and concepts of utilizing infographics, let's take a look at some of the design principles commonly utilized in visual design. Commonly referred to as CARP, contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. These are the 4 elements recommended that you utilize when creating your design. Let's go ahead and look at these 4 principles in greater detail. Now that we've introduced the 4 concepts of design, let's discuss in greater detail each individual principle. The first principle we will discuss is contrast. A good way to create contrast in your infographic or design document is through the use of colors, different colors, or shapes. The second principle, alignment, helps guide the designer to visually connect different elements of design. This helps the audience eyes flow through the document and also help keep them engaged. The third principle is repetition, and this can be achieved by consistently using elements in your design. So the consistent use of certain fonts, the same font, consistent use of colors, the use of bullets, the use of shapes. These all provide repetition. And the final design element we will discuss, the final design principle we will discuss is proximity. So the designer doesn't want to separate content or items that are directly related. For example, if you have a title and subtitle, you want to be sure your title and subtitle are in close proximity to each other. Let's check out an example of an effective infographic. This infographic, U.S. Students in Social Networking, is utilizing the 4 basic principles, design principles of CARP. You can see they have contrast by the use of the blue and red, and they are using that consistently throughout the document. They also are utilizing the use of alignment, so this easily helps our eye flow through the document. Proximity. They have the percentages close to the graphs and to the content and description associated with it. And again, repetition. They consistently are utilizing colors, shapes, and layout throughout the entire document. Let's take a few minutes and review this sample infographic. As we look at this, let's consider what we just reviewed about the 4 principles of design. This example appears to have some bad design elements. So let's begin by considering contrast. We mentioned contrast can be demonstrated by the use of colors and shapes in a design. You can see in this example, they did a good job of showing contrast around the outside of the star by utilizing lines and shadows. However, the first thing that stuck out to me was the title and subtitles. The colors blend in with the background and they really don't provide much contrast to really engage the learner and catch their attention. You also see that with the percentages included inside the star. We've all heard the phrase, "A picture's worth 1,000 words." I often hear the phrase, "A good infographic is worth 1,000 words." I haven't been able to figure out who coined this revision, but I see it a lot in reference material for infographics and visual literacy. Now, let's take a look at how the previous infographic would look like with the changes we have discussed. This clearly shows that when utilizing the 4 principles of design properly, you can create a visually appealing infographic. In this example, with contrast, you can see in the heading and subheading, the colors of the font have been adjusted so they stand out and appeal to the reader. The alignment, you can see the title and subtitle has been aligned also, so it appears and pops out to the reader. Repetition, they have used consistent colors throughout this document. Prior, they had yellow, hot pink, red, blue, purple. A lot of colors were in this document, and that can provide cognitive overload for your reader. So now this all blends. And finally, proximity. They have relocated the social media icons to be closer to the data inside the graph. This is a well-designed infographic. Thank you for joining us today. I hope by now you have a basic understanding of 3 benefits and 3 concepts when utilizing infographics, and also a basic understanding of the design principles associated with visual literacy when creating infographics. Thanks for joining us. Now I want to review for you feedback I received from users of the tutorial. I requested feedback of my tutorial from 2 students from the Ohio University Computer Education and Technology program. Only one of the users has had a class and introduction into infographics. Both students and users had provided similar feedback on their experience. Both of the users seemed willing and comfortable with providing positive and constructive feedback. Let's go ahead and review some of the feedback I received from the users. Both of the users found the graphics and worked examples appealing and informative. One specifically stated that they felt they would be able to properly design an infographic. One felt the instruction for identifying and explaining needed content for a good infographic was well presented. Both users also stated the queuing of the content during the presentation of the worked examples was found to be helpful. The queuing was utilized, if you recall, to highlight either poorly designed or properly designed CARP principles. So if there was proper contrast, alignment, repetition, or proximity used in the infographic, the queuing, either by using a box around the items, the highlighted items, or the arrow, the flashing arrow, were used to identify those key elements. The students also indicated the introduction that was provided gave a personal feel to the tutorial. However, both of the users did critique the lighting that was utilized during the filming, that the bright overhead lighting they found distracting and took away from what I was actually presenting or discussing with the user. I do agree with this critique as well, and we'll definitely have to be prepared next time, better prepared next time for lighting when doing a tutorial. One student also gave valuable critique of the audio quality. This student had indicated that during the introduction that the audio quality had dropped when it came to transitioning from the live video to the screen capture presentation. And the first instance of this happened around 1 minute and 4 seconds. I believe this was an issue because I utilized 2 different devices for the tutorial. For the live discussion, the video discussion, I had utilized my cell phone, and for the screen capturing and voiceover, I utilized my computer. So clearly there was a difference in audio quality. And this is, again, something I will note for future tutorials or presentations.
In the original presentation or tutorial, at the closing of the video, I did not properly cut or transition the presentation to the end. In the revision, I have provided a more thorough and appropriate closing. And finally, and probably the biggest critique was the length of pauses during the tutorial. I did have one student, one user indicate this, and as I look back, that was clearly a distraction and the pauses were too long. In my revision, I was able to reduce the length of these pauses or totally cut out the pauses. And I was able to utilize that through the software and cutting mechanism that it allows. So this, by cutting out these pauses, that will help keep the learner more engaged and less distracted. Now I'm going to present to you the multimedia principles I used in my tutorial. I'm going to present them close to the order that we reviewed them in class. So to start with, my first principle is the multimedia principle. And the multimedia principle states that learning with the use of words and phrases is more effective than learning with only words. And naturally, just this video alone incorporates the use of words and pictures throughout the entire tutorial. The second principle is split attention principle. And this states that related content or information must be integrated for information to be understood by the learner. In the tutorial of demonstrating the poorly designed infographic, if you recall, the social media icons at top were not located next to the data they were representing. Therefore, that was causing the learner to split their attention between the data and the social media icon to refer which social media sites the data related to. Also, in the original video, there were a few instances when the queuing circle in yellow randomly appeared next to unrelated content, and that also can cause the learner to split their attention. The third principle is spatial contiguity principle, and it states that students learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented near rather than far away from each other on the page or screen. One example of this principle was in my original version. I had included long pauses of the narration. So in the revised tutorial, I tried to reduce the pauses or interruptions without taking away from the conversation style of tutorial or presentation I was trying to promote. The fourth principle is the redundancy principle. And the redundancy principle is when redundant material interferes with rather than facilitates learning. So there were times during my while I was narrating with the PowerPoint presentation that can be redundant. However, in my presentation, I tried to provide sequential paraphrasing to not make the presentation redundant. My fifth principle is the signaling or cueing principle, which states that people learn better from multimedia when cues are used to guide the user's attention to relevant content. Cueing was used multiple times throughout my tutorial. For example, yellow arrows appeared to show bad content in the example of the social media poorly designed infographic. Also, the use of yellow boxes around the title and subtitle in that same poorly designed infographic were utilized. My next principle is the worked example principle, which states that multimedia learners learn best when they received worked examples. In my tutorial, the audience experienced the studying errors principle by using a combination of correct and incorrect infographic examples. The next principle is the self-explanation principle, which is a constructive learning activity that facilitates deep and robust learning. This is accomplished by having learners reflect, generate inferences, and repairing mental models. In my tutorial, I asked the learners to think about or activate prior knowledge when critiquing the infographics. I asked them to look at the example of the infographics and reflect on what needed to be corrected based on their knowledge of the CARP principle. My next principle is the feedback principle, which states that novice learners learn best with explanatory feedback than with corrective feedback. In my tutorial, I gave explanatory feedback on the poorly designed information in the infographic. Along with the well-designed infographic, I provided extensive explanations. I was also able to utilize my user feedback that I had received to make adjustments to my original tutorial. This hopefully will help reduce cognitive overload of the users. Principle number 9 is the personalization principle. And that is the belief that people learn more deeply when words in a multimedia presentation are in a conversation style. I've attempted this in my tutorial, however, I believe it's presented more at the end of the tutorial once I was more relaxed and experienced with creating the presentation. My final principle is the modality principle. And it states presenting some information in visual mode and some in auditory mode can reduce cognitive overload. I think this principle sums up the entire project. I believe I used this principle effectively throughout the entire presentation, both visually and through auditory mode.